this is a review of the 2017 Pivot Firebird. It's a bike that just came out this year and it's aimed at the enduro and bike park market. This bike comes with a full carbon frame and 170 millimeters of travel. It's also got 27.5 inch wheels. It's definitely on the super burly side of enduro bikes today. So that being said, it actually comes in at a weight around 28 pounds. You can find these bikes in stores for about $5,000 all the way up to $10,000 for an XTR Di2 build. This bike fits in the same price range of like a Yeti Turk Series, a Santa Cruz CC, or even a Specialized S-Works type of bike. So it's right in the realm of high-end mountain bikes today. So let's talk more about the bike. So the geometry is built off those buzzwords, long, low, and slack, that you've been hearing a lot lately. This is a size large frame, and the reach is actually a 465, which is like a Yeti extra large. So it's a super big bike, and it's meant to be really stable. It's also really slack, and it comes in at a 65-degree head angle with only a 170 millimeter fork. The chainstays are super short, they're 430 millimeters, and that's right there with the shortest of all mountain bikes in this category. They say that makes for a really snappy rear end. So the seat tube angle is actually 74 degrees, so it's actually relatively steep. So I found out that the bike climbs really well because of it. I've come off an evil following, and that bike has a really slack seat tube angle, and this is just a breath of fresh air to have a steep seat tube angle on this big of a bike. It's got a pretty neutral bottom bracket height. It's not too high, it's not too low, and considering the travel, 170 millimeters, 349 millimeters is not too high, and it will sag in and feel really good in the corners. This bike's reach is very long, so it's really conducive to a shoulder stem, say a 35 or 40 millimeter stem. Also, one thing to mention is the seat tube is actually cut really low, so you can fit those really tall dropper posts, those 170s or 200 mil if you have the clearance. So we got the geometry taken care of, so now let's get to how the bike rides.
Got a few. All right, first descent on the Firebird, following the fastest man in Santa Cruz, baby. Oh my.
So I actually did 2 rides down in Santa Cruz. That equaled to about 6 hours, maybe about 6,000 feet of climbing. And we did it on the UC campus trails down there. So yeah, we took it through everything from climbing to descending to steep descents to flat descents to rough route sections to jumps. We got about everything in there, and I think I have a good gist of how the bike rides now. So pedaling. Pedals exactly like my Yeti. So that's not a bad thing at all. The Yeti is one of the best bikes on the market for pedaling. Extremely supportive rear end when you get in that anti-squat zone, and it just pedals uphill forever. Like, it has no pedal bob, it feels really good. The only thing I can say is when it does hit a square edge bump, it actually floats over the bump. Apparently it has a little bit of rearward travel, and you can really feel that on the trail. It does not get caught up like a Yeti does on small roots and rocks. Honestly, even at 170 millimeters of travel, I could pedal this thing all day. It does not feel like that much travel on the uphills. So what you guys are really here for is the descending. This bike is meant to be a full-out shredder on the descents. So everything from jumps to roots to everything just pinned down the trail. That's kind of why they market it as a park bike and enduro shredder. This bike is meant to be pushed hard. And when you're on those flatter trails, it's not so good. The front end is really long, it's really slack, it feels a little sluggish. But when you get to those steep descents, those gnarly fast bits, the bike just rips it apart. It's actually one of my favorite bikes on the descents. It just feels like, I don't want to say this, but a downhill bike. The last downhill bike I rode was a Scott Gambler, and the mid-stroke felt almost identical to this bike. I think that's because it has that linear suspension curve where it feels like you're using all of the travel. It's not resisting it. It rides in the trail, not really above it like a Yeti would. It just really lets you be confident and sit in the travel. So basically plows like crazy, and it has crazy grip in the wider corners. I did get a little bit of chain slap, but nothing that mastic tape could not fix. But on the flatter trails, I actually understeered off the trail like 4 or 5 times. I don't know if it was the brakes or how wide the bars are. It has 800mm bars, and I'm not used to these brakes. It seems like on the tighter descents, you have to slide the rear wheel and really drift it to get it in those corners when you're on a really tight descent or really flat descent. It's so long, it's not that snappy and not that playful, but that's why you really got to ride it at speed. And now we're going to look at frame design. So first off is the colors. I think this color really pops. It's got this red coral color and it looks really cool out on the trails. It's really a vibrant color and it really grabs your eye. The other color they have is also a black with the same blue decals along the frame. So looking at this bike, it's really aesthetically pleasing. It's really long and low. It's got really sleek lines. It's a really aggressive looking bike with a slack head angle. The rear swing arm is super burly. It honestly looks like their Phoenix downhill bike. It just looks fast sitting there. It doesn't even have to move. It looks like it's pinned already. This frame is designed around a DW Link suspension design, which has a good level of anti-squat, so it's really good for pedaling. It's got a 148 rear end, so it's pretty standard. And as some bikes on the market are going back to the threaded bottom bracket, this one keeps a press fit 92 bottom bracket. They say they can design a lighter, more integrated, and more durable frame because of it. It helps with wider pivot placement and better bearing support. Pivot thinks it's the better way to do bottom brackets, and if you think about it, the headset is pressed in, so why shouldn't the bottom bracket? I think my absolute favorite part about this bike has to be the cable routing. There's so many bikes on the market with poor cable routing that rattle all the way down the trail. They're super obnoxious. And Pivot did not choose to use an internal tube system. They felt like that rattled down the trail a little bit more than they would like. So it's actually an open system, just like a Yeti SV6C. So the reason it doesn't rattle are that the cables are actually bolted to the frame where the housing funnels into the frame. So when you pull on the cable, it can't move and you can't push it in. The housing is locked and it has no give room to rattle. Definitely one of my favorite things about this bike. I wish every bike had that system. Also, when you take these little ports out, it's really easy to fish the cable through. There's not tiny holes, they're very big and they're very easy to pull the cable through. This bike is fully Di2 compatible, and they almost designed the internal cable routing around that. Almost too much about that, because if you use a standard cable, you have this cable that routes underneath your bottom bracket, and it's kind of in a vulnerable zone. Obviously, you have bigger problems if you're really smashing a rock through that cable into your bottom bracket. But I don't really like that design. It can get caught on stuff. I really wish they had a port on top of the down tube around here that could flow cleanly back to the rear derailleur. But other than that, the cable routing is amazing, and I really wish a lot of other companies would adopt this system. So one thing to know if you're going to purchase this bike is you really can't run a coil shock. The only coil shock they recommend is the Push 11.6. Apparently it's tuned in a way that it can work around Pivot's linear suspension system. With a normal coil shock, I think it just bottoms out too harshly and they're not happy with the leverage curves it gives. But I don't know why you would want to run a coil anyways. This Float X2 feels amazing on this bike. Probably the best suspension system I've ever felt downhill. It's so supple, it does everything you want, and it's super controlled. Speaking of suspension, we'll go to the fork. You can run a 170mm fork or a 180. And another thing I thought was weird was they use a full 1.5-inch steer tube. And I guess that's so they can use angle sets and reach adjust headsets. So you can really customize it to your liking. So something that can be a little concerning is there's actually 10 bearings on this entire frame. So that's a lot. If those were to wear out, it's kind of a lot of money and it's kind of a hassle to install all those new bearings when the time comes. What's really cool is the shock doesn't have a shock bushing. So you know when your shock bushing wears out and you get a feel that feels like headset play, that won't happen on this bike. So the rear end will always feel solid and supple. One thing to consider is tire size. You can fit up to a 2.5-inch tire on the rear of this bike, so that's plenty for all of you enduro riders. It's got frame protection on the down tube. It's this rubberized guard for the chainstay and above the chain on the seat stay, and it really helps prevent from those rock strikes and the chain from damaging the chainstay. And come on guys, where is the bottle cage? There is a lot of room down there. You could definitely fit a bottle cage. I know it's marketed at that like park bike style rider, but to be honest, a lot of enduro riders are going to use this. This is a great privateer enduro bike. It really needs a bottle cage on it. A lot of other bikes on the market with similar suspension designs have a wattle cage. I think that's extremely important, and I think that's looked over way too often, and it's a big problem in today's mountain bikes. So who is it made for? It's meant for a super aggressive enduro rider or a substitute for a park bike. You don't really need a downhill bike if you have one of these. This thing can shred any course. You'll never be undergunned on the bike. This bike can tackle pretty much any terrain I can think of. Maybe not as fast as a downhill bike, but you're pretty much there. And then on the enduro courses, on any of the gnarlier enduros, it will do a great job soaking up all the bumps and keeping you going fast down the trail. And it helps that you can pedal that thing all day. So you can go to Whistler, do some bike park laps, and go across the valley and hit those trails, no problem. It will pedal all day. My only complaint's a little slow and sluggish on the flatter trails, but that's not what this bike is meant for. This bike is meant for steeps, ripping, and huge jumps. So that being said, I would definitely recommend this for a really aggressive rider. I had enough time on this bike to give you guys a good, honest review, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much that I might be going to the shop right now and picking one of these up. It's actually that good. It makes me want to sell my Yeti pretty badly. So stay tuned for that, but it's a slight possibility that that might happen. Other than that, hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you out on the trails. Cheers.
No.